Здравствуйте, comrades. Or, obviously, as we say on Socialism Saturday, we are not comrades on Saturday. We are comrades. Comrades on Saturday. There we go. I can't even pronounce the name of my own cult sometimes as I'm sitting here in twilight lighting. I thought some nicer lighting might be a little bit softer. It's like we're getting ready for the show. The show that does not end on the most dystopian stream you will watch all week. Welcome, comrades, to our very first Socialism Saturday of 2023. Now, did you all enjoy the new song? We moved on from the Red Army chorus. The Red Army chorus may make a comeback, but I was doing some research and I also needed to fix the introduction for Socialism Saturday in general. And I was doing some research, and it turns out there are many socialist songs that we can avail ourselves of. And so why not? Why not change it up every once in a while? And they all basically sound the same anyway. So why not? I enjoyed the new song. I thought it was just a little bit softer, shall we say, a little bit more tame. But guys, you are going to there is no better way that we can kick off Socialism Saturday in 2023. There's just no better way. I was looking around for a video today and I found one that I just think I don't know if we're going to be able to top this for the entirety of Socialism Saturday in 2023. We're starting strong. We are starting with our favorite dystopian topic of family abolition. Now, I like to keep an eye on our friend Sophie Lewis. For those of you who are new to Socialism Saturday, Sophie Lewis is a woman who has now written at least 2 books about why we need to abolish the biological family and why we should embrace surrogacy as the way that we are going to populate the planet. That's Sophie's position. She's just released a new book on the topic. It's called Full Surrogacy Now. I'm not joking about that. It's real. I have it on my desktop. I have it on my Kindle. I'm going to read it at some point when I work up the nerve. But I was checking in on our friend Sophie because I like to do that every now and again. And do you know what I found out? Sophie did a lecture at the Andrea Mitchell Center for the Study of Democracy at the University of Pennsylvania. Who knows who Andrea Mitchell is off the top of your heads? I was like, Andrea Mitchell got a Center for the Study of Democracy at an Ivy League school? The Andrea Mitchell Center for the Study of Democracy at the University of Pennsylvania offers programming exploring the nature of democracy and the challenges it faces. The Mitchell Center aims not just to promote, but to understand democracy, global in its outlook, multifaceted in its purpose. The Mitchell Center seeks to contribute to the ongoing quest for democratic values. How we're defining democratic might differ by the day. Yes, she is a political reporter and has her own show on MSNBC, that Andrea Mitchell. And our friend Sophie went and did a lecture that is on the YouTube channel for the Andrea Mitchell Center for the Study of Democracy. It only has 64 views. We're going to give it more views tonight than it's had since it was posted. What if the family was not the only place you might hope to feel safe, loved, cared for, and accepted? What if we could do better than the family? We need to talk about the family. For those who are lucky, families can be filled with love and care. But for many, they are sites of pain, from abandonment and neglect to abuse and violence. Nobody is more likely to harm you than your family. Even in so-called happy families, the unpaid, unacknowledged work that it takes to raise children and care for each other is endless and exhausting. As part of the Mitchell Center's Capitalism, Socialism, Democracy series, M. Edith Skarkloff sits with the leading feminist critic, Dr. Sophie Lewis, to discuss the case for family abolition, drawing on her inclusive and vital polemic Abolish the Family, a manifesto for care and liberation. Lewis will discuss the history of family abolitionist demands, beginning with the 19th century utopian socialist and sex radical Charles Fourier, the Communist Manifesto. I've always told you guys this came from the fucking Communist Manifesto. And the early 20th century Russian family abolitionist Alexei, I don't know how to pronounce that. Turning her attention to the 60s, Lewis reminds us of the anti-family politics of radical feminists and the gay liberationists, a tradition she traces to the queer Marxists, bringing family abolition to the 21st century. This event will also address historic right-wing panic. It's like they got every keyword in there about Black families and the violent imposition of the family on Indigenous communities, as well as contemporary political iterations of these kinds of violence. Did I serve you up an amazing first Socialism Saturday of 2023 or what? This has got everything. Everything. And it was a lecture at an Ivy League institution, and this happened a month ago. 1 month ago. On December 2nd, 2022 is when this was posted and got 64 views since then. Should we play Woke Bingo? I need to make, this is something I haven't done yet. I apologize. I need to make a special Socialism Saturday bingo card because we absolutely should be playing. I just didn't get, I had to make a new intro, man. I just didn't get it together for today. But like, I promise you there will be a Socialism Saturday bingo card coming. Now, a couple of things before we get started. So hunker down, get a drink, get a snack. We're going to be here for a minute. We got a lot to talk about, guys. But before we do that, I want to draw your attention to just a couple of things that I've been working on this week. Number one, I want to let you know that I'm starting a weekly newsletter on my Actively Unwoke Substack. And basically, this is going to be a roundup of things I did in the previous week. So I know I create a lot of content. I create a lot of content in different places around the internet. I know sometimes that can be really hard to track because like I'm here, there, I'm over there, I'm everywhere. Not everyone's on every platform. I totally get it. So I decided to start doing a single post in which I consolidate all of my Unwoke content for the previous week so you can find it in one place. That post is currently pinned to the top of my YouTube page. I will throw it in the chat. Guess what? I'm streaming on LinkedIn right now. Who thinks I'm going to get banned off of LinkedIn before this stream is even done? Probably will. But I posted that on the Facebook chats and wherever else this chat thing on StreamYard might go to. So you have the article there. If you don't get it for some reason, if you don't get that link, let me put a banner. There it is. You can find it at Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com if you want to read the Unwoke roundup on there. And it's got a lot of great stuff. I wrote some great articles this week. I had another Woke in this Woke Mind series. I wrote an article about why Cori Bush is calling Byron Donalds a white supremacist because it has nothing to do with skin color. I also made videos on the topic. I made a video of reading the Woke Mind article from last week. I told you why they're using power to take Jordan Peterson's license in Canada. We did a great happy hour yesterday, and yeah, I'm putting Socialism Saturday in there too, just for a reminder. I also launched a new episode of the Actively Unwoke podcast, the first episode of 2023. You can subscribe on all major podcasting platforms, activelyunwoke.com/podcast. And that'll link you into there. And this also has what I've got going on next week and what I'm working on right now. So mark your calendars. On Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Spy Stream is back. And I can't tell you what we're spy streaming because I don't want to get caught, okay? But trust me, you need to come to Spy Stream on Thursday. It will be on my YouTube channel and wherever else I'm able to stream from on Thursday. Who knows? I'll probably be banned on LinkedIn by then, so I don't know if we're going to have that. but it will be everywhere else, okay? You need to come to this spy stream. It is on the channel right now. Set your reminder, and I'll be streaming on all the other platforms too: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also working on another article in the Woke Mind series, and we're going to talk about how the woke left gains power over you, what games they play, so you can watch out for them. Yes, bot, I will tell you in the Zoom. I absolutely will. I'm also going to take you inside. We talked about trans maxing this week. I have a clip of this. If you haven't seen it yet, it's in my stream from the other day. We talked about this new thing where incels are actually transitioning their gender to get sex. There is a manual that teaches them how to do this, like 70 pages long. I talked about it in my stream the other day. I have a clip waiting to go on YouTube right now, except YouTube wants to demonetize it. I'm arguing with them over that. So if you want to, but I'm going to be doing a deep dive into the trans maxing manual, and that's going to be on my Substack this week. So make sure you subscribe for that. I'll be recording some more podcast episodes. Of course, we do Happy's Hours on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and we always do Socialism Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And if you want up to the minute updates, because I might do some more stuff as well, make sure you're following my Actively Unwoke Twitter account at Actively Unwoke, and you can get up to the minute updates on what I'm working on. Now, guys, one more thing before we jump into the good stuff. I do have a goal this month, in that I want to make sure my Substack is free for everyone. I really, really do. But I'm going to have to put a paywall up at the end of the month if I don't get 100 new monthly subscribers this month, because I need to start. I want to do Unwoke activism as a full-time job. It's what I'm really good at. I'm able to teach people this stuff, but I need to be able to free up my time doing consulting and other things that you guys don't know about, because I don't want it to get canceled on the internet in case I need it. So I need to free up my time, and the only way to do that is with your support. If you want to see me making more Unwoke content than you've ever seen me making before, consider becoming a subscriber on my Substack for $5 a month. I am 30% of the way to my goal for this month. But if I don't hit 100 paid subscribers, I'm going to turn on that paywall. Okay, I don't want to have to do that. I want to keep my stuff free for everyone. If you are in a position to support the work I'm doing, please do so, because not everyone can. Okay, and I understand that. And I really want to, I don't want to put a paywall up, but I will if I have to entice people to support the work I'm doing. So you can do that on my Substack. You can also support my work by becoming a member of my channel and by heading over to activelyunwoke.com/support. That'll give you links to join my locals community, my Patreon, my other Substack there. Make a one-time gift, whatever you want to do. Some stuff we got coming up in the community is tomorrow we have movie night in the supporter Discord. So if you become a paid member of my Substack today, I'm going to give you access to the supporter Discord tomorrow. You can come and watch The Jazz Singer with us on Sunday at 8 p.m. We do movie nights weekly in my supporter Discord. So if you don't like this movie, hang on a minute. We're going to do another one next week. So that's one of the things you get. We're also doing Ender's Game Book Club in mid-February. So you got a little bit over a month to read Ender's Game. Don't just watch the movie. Read the book. The book is really great. And we're going to be discussing that in my community for my locals, Patreon, Substack supporters coming up on February 18th, which is going to be next month, because I want to give you a little bit of time to read the book. It's a little bit. Oh, God, Mr. X, what is trans maxing? You're going to find out all about that this week, Mr. X. But you can go watch the stream that I did, I think, 2 days ago. I talked about it. I've got a clip waiting to go up. Trans maxing is when incels induce gender dysphoria in themselves, so they transition their gender because they think it's the only way they can get sex. It's crazy, and it's real, and that's something I'm going to be digging into a little bit further this week. All right, guys, with those orders of business out of the way, please mount that like button for me, comrades, if you haven't already, and I will be pouring myself a drink. I'm going for this Mind Over Matter pumpkin spice cheesecake double chocolate milk stout. If you're drinking something fun, yes, Sin, don't worry about it. I appreciate your contribution. Don't and Sin, my paying supporters will always get access to the Substack articles. I'll just post them in different places. So don't you worry about it, Sin. That's another thing. If you support me on locals or Patreon, I'm going to give you access to the paywall content. I'm not going to make you support me on 18 different platforms. You're going to be all set, Sin. So I do appreciate that support. All right, let me pour this here beer. If you're drinking anything exciting, let us know in the chat. I feel like I've had this spear before, but I don't remember it. So we're going to give it another try. Hopefully it's good. Cheers, everyone. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Now, if this is your first Socialism Saturday, one thing you should know before we start watching the video. Oh my God, look at the head on that. Boom. Cheers. If you are new to Socialism Saturday, what you should know is a couple of things. Number one, if you don't understand the language that the presenter is using, that's common. You're not dumb. You're not missing anything. Socialists, and these are the real socialists. These are the farthest left of the far left. Okay? Real socialists speak in a completely different language. They use overly flowery, there we go, language. They speak in word salad a lot of times. They never pass up the opportunity to use 27 words to say something when 5 words will do just fine. So they're going to make things sound really complicated and complex. If you don't understand the language, just wait. It's going to become more clear. All right. And what I do on Socialism Saturday is I do my best to try to decipher what's being said and talked about, to try to explain it based on having watched more of this content than I probably should have by now. It's driving me a little crazy, but I will do my best. And I get confused sometimes too. So if you're confused about what they're saying, don't worry about it. You can ask questions in the chat. I will try to explain. If you have thoughts in the chat about what they're saying, if you want to help us understand it, then chat in. This is a community activity. I can't be responsible for having all the good ideas, guys. And so if you want to support that way by giving your analysis, I can tell you if I agree with you, disagree with you, that sort of thing. Sometimes we might disagree. That's all right. But just sit tight if you don't understand them. And over time, you learn to speak their language. Okay? All right, guys, mount that like button if you're ready to get started. Let's do it.
Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get our discussion underway. Welcome to the Andrea Mitchell Center for the Study of Democracy. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Miranda Edith Skleroff, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science at Penn. This event is part of the Andrea Mitchell Center's Capital.
I think the sound might be a little low, but I can't turn it up anymore. So here's what I need everyone to do. Okay, here's what's going to happen. If the sound is a little bit low, I'm going to turn down my microphone volume just slightly. And then I need everyone to turn up the volume on whatever they're watching. That's how we adjust the sound, because I ain't fancy. Just turn up the volume on what you're watching, and we'll try to make it level. I need to get a soundboard. I know that. All right.
Socialism, Democracy series.
I hope that sounds okay. Let me know if that's okay.
And Dr. Matt Roth for hosting us. I'm excited to discuss the book Abolish the Family, a manifesto for care and liberation with its authors, Dr. Sophie Lewis. Lewis is a freelance writer living in Philadelphia, teaching courses for the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research. Her first book was Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family. Her essays have appeared in many venues, including the New York Times, Harper's Magazine, the Boston Review, and Plus One, the London Review of Books, and Salvage. Lewis studied English, politics, environment, and geography at Oxford, the New School, and Manchester University, and is now an unpaid visiting scholar at the Feminist, Queer, and Transgender Studies Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Today, we will be focusing on her newest book.
Did you hear the name of that center at the University of Pennsylvania? We need to look into this. Apparently, we need to do an audit of the academic centers at the University of Pennsylvania. Let me just rewind that just a little bit so you guys can hear that again.
Politics, environment, and geography at Oxford, the New School, and Manchester University, and is now an unpaid visiting scholar at the Feminist, Queer, and Transgender Studies Center at the University of Pennsylvania.
Transgender Queer Studies and Feminism Center.
Abolish the Family.
How crazy.
Even though we live at a moment of particular crisis, you may have noticed that when it comes to media coverage, governmental policy, and rhetoric on both the left and the right wing, the family is always in crisis. Writing at this pivotal moment of economic and political upheaval, scholar Sophie Lewis presents a book that speaks both to the role of family abolition and liberation struggles since the 19th century, century, and also to the present day fight for care and liberation beyond the family. Sophie, thank you so much for being with us.
So I just Googled the name of this center at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm going to put this in the chat. Check this out. The proper name is the Center for Research in Feminist, Queer, and Transgender Studies. And they have like events and things. Oh my God. I need to like make a list of this stuff when it shows up on I need to make a list of like woke university centers. That would actually be a really fun project. If someone wants to help me do research to make a list of the most woke centers at universities in the country, that might be a fun project to work on. I'll publish it on my Substack. You'll get full credit if you want it. If you want to remain anonymous, that's fine too. But if you want to come help me do that, I would totally publish that.
Us here today.
It's a huge pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're just going to jump right in for a Q&A. We'll be having a discussion for about the first 45 minutes, and then we'll jump over for audience questions. Feel free to ask your questions whenever you think of them, and we'll save them for a separate Q&A point. But I think just to start off with, I'm going to ask the very basic question, which is also the title of the event, which is, what is family abolition, and how is it different from how its detractors might present it, and even how people who might hear the word for the first time and what their responses might be? What is family abolition, and how is it a little bit different from just putting those two words together?
Yeah, so I think of abolition of the family as pretty much synonymous with the deprivatization of care in society.
The deprivatization of care. Okay, first off, pop quiz. What does abolition mean? It's not complicated, but like, so she equates the abolition of the family to the deprivatization of care. What happens? Who is in charge of caring for people when we deprivatize care? Yep, abolish me. Anytime you hear abolition, to get rid of. If they also might say liberation. Anytime you hear liberation, liberate yourself from. Abolish, to get rid of. Liberate, to free yourself from. Anytime you hear the words abolition or liberation, you need to think socialism, because what they mean is abolish the current system, liberate you from the system. And it doesn't matter if they're talking about race or gender or the family or any of these things, it always leads to overthrowing the system. And yes, when she is saying the deprivatization of care, what she means is that she wants mommy government to be in charge of caring for people. And that includes people who are little. That includes people who are sick. That includes people who are elderly. Deprivatization of care means that she wants everyone else to be responsible for you and your family members. Really think about that. If you are afraid of things you're hearing in Canada around them incentivizing people to, well, not remain on this planet, the fastest way to get to what Canada is doing is deprivatization of care.
The definition that I think is most important of the family is actually to do with the privatization of care, labor in society. That's perhaps a bit counterintuitive to people who, don't think of the family as, well, perhaps don't think of it very much at all. In fact, we're not very much used to thinking of the family as a structural phenomenon, let alone a sort of extension of, institutions of the state, or
exactly
an economic site of activity at all.
Exactly.
Right? But there's an immense amount of sort of ideological naturalization that creates that sort of unthinking that we do every day about what we are doing when we do the family, and in a sense acquiesce to the private public division in capitalist society, which, you know, currently has reached a point of intensification so extreme that even the propertied classes in the COVID pandemic are kind of writing op-eds about how something needs to change on the level of how we live privately, or perhaps.
She just used the term propertied classes. I haven't heard that term before. What does she mean by propertied classes? Yeah, Sam, you heard the same thing I did. Propertied. What does that mean? It means you own a home, or you own a business, or you own private property of any sort. When you own private, one of the goals that these people have is to abolish all private property. That means your home, that means your land, that means your business, that means that apartment that you bought to be a landlord. They want to take all of that away from you. That's if you are in the propertied class, you are in the bourgeoisie. They want everyone to be workers. Equity means that everyone is in the proletariat. Equity means that everyone is a worker. The bourgeois are the evil capitalists that they want to abolish. You will own nothing, and you will be happy.
Yeah, too privately. But what I'm thinking about when I talk about abolition of the family actually has a very long history. And I go into that a little bit in my very short book, which we're gathering here today to discuss. And it's a very whistle-stop tour, but in some senses, you know, it's been an orthodox kind of Marxist demand, not one that is necessarily remembered by all, you know, Marxists, unfortunately, you know, to my mind. But it also has you know, a really strong history among sort of anti-imperialist, gay and lesbian, Black, third world radical traditions in the sort of so-called red decade of the 60s and early 70s, where, you know, abolition of the family was a very sort of elementary, really quite familiar and well-known element of you know, the overthrow of capitalist society as a whole. So I guess
the overthrow,
what
isn't it interesting that she just used the term overthrow? And isn't it also interesting? Did you notice she seems a little sullen, doesn't she, about saying that, you know, abolition of the family has always been a Marxist demand, and it has. They literally do write about it in the Communist Manifesto. I feel like I talk about this every week, but it's the truth. But isn't it funny that she seems a little bit sad that it seems like most Marxists have forgotten that abolition is one of their demands? That was an interesting little development. But anyway, yes, it's almost like when she says overthrow, it almost means that it's like insurrection, doesn't it? Insurrection for me, but not for thee.
I think it is. It's the idea that we can, you know, reproduce our lives and make people in a way that is much more, you know, centered in the common and the public realm, rather than depending so much on atomized and free labor in private nuclear households. What it is not, since you also asked me, you know, what it's not about separating people. It's not about a top-down, you know, sort of deletion of infrastructure in one stroke. It's certainly not about somehow, you know, failing to appreciate the immense amount of, you know, life-giving work that the family does in the world for many, many people today, right? But the family in many contexts, for marginalized and racialized and undocumented communities, is often the only sort of fence against the racial terror of the state. It's a sort of infrastructure that helps protect people, against much worse realities, including the kind of depredations of the labor market and so on. And I just want to be really clear that it's not about, like, family abolition is not about saying, that everything the family does is somehow bad. And there's also a recognition, I think, that has always been present in this politics, that if emancipatory and liberation.
Hang on. She should get a real job. She has a real job. She teaches lectures and courses in the University of Pennsylvania.
Social justice forces don't prevail and don't win, that it's possible that something worse than the family does exist, and that doesn't really bear thinking about. But the other, the fact is also that the family is already a crisis. It is part of the crisis of capitalism, the social reproduction crisis, as Marxist feminists would call it.
Why do they consider the family to be a part of capitalism? Does anyone have any ideas about that? I have ideas about that, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. Why do they consider the family to be a component of capitalism? Why do you think? The family is resistance to the state. I think that is definitely part of it, Barb. Marx said so. I mean, yeah, that might be reason enough, huh? Because it supports the system. Yes. The family unit. So there's a lot of reasons I think that this is. Number one, the family unit is the thing that you are going to be loyal to, the biological family unit, above the state. And so that automatically makes you more have more affinity for something above the state, which is going to be bad for them. But one of the things that they would argue is that family requires unpaid labor on the part of the mother, who is the caretakers of the kids. They also might argue that children are exploited by the family for their unpaid labor. Okay? Exactly. Looking after kids is unpaid labor. But really, the real thing of it is they dislike the family because the biological family means that you are going to be loyal to something outside of the state rather than to the state itself. If you have the biological family to rely on, then you don't need mommy government to take care of you, right? That's the real problem. That's what she's never going to say, but that's the real problem. William, buy me a beer. I appreciate that, William. Thank you very much. All right, guys, mount that like button if you haven't already. That helps out. That makes more people aware of the stream, and so it helps everyone to learn about socialism.
Social reproduction being the sort of ensemble of activities that remake a human person every day, so that person can go back to work and sell more labor to the capitalist class to generate value. Social reproduction also, reproduces people who don't work, on the labor market. So from the point of view of the bosses and the capitalists, that's kind of a waste, right? So there's a lot of kind of elements of what happens in the family that is not directly kind of serving the system, and that's why I think we kind of partly rightly experience the family as a zone away from the logics of the economy, and from the sort of discipline of the state, and that's not, like I say, there is a tiny bit of truth to that, right? We feel attached to this zone because we think of it as a sort of sanctuary and a sort of haven. Unfortunately, it's not actually a pure haven or a pure refuge at all. And it props up very much these systems that ultimately wear us down, force us into lifetimes of backbreaking work, which recently with the Great Resignation and the Big Quit, we saw people kind of reaching a breaking point in relation to. And I thought it was interesting that the crises about sort of pods and quarantines and the sort of rejection of work came together in our recent history, because I think of work and the family as, completely inseparable, and we can get into that later. And I should stop talking really, but I just wanted to emphasize that it's certainly not about saying, families suck and, we just want to kind of get rid of them. We can get into what abolition actually means, right? But it's certainly not about separating or diminishing the amount of care that we receive in the world. On the contrary, it's about recognizing that if you love the people in your family, you probably agree that they deserve a lot more than the organized scarcity that is the private nuclear household that currently arranges the care that we get.
Her premise is that if we deprivatize care entirely, which means mommy government is in charge of caring for everyone at every stage of their life, her premise is that people will be much better taken care of if we just get rid of all biological ties and let the state take over, because the state can provide you with more under the Marxist system than you will be provided with by your biological family under the capitalist system. That's her theory. Whether or not that's true, I would suspect not. But that is the underlying premise that she's working from.
Great. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to jump a little bit ahead in my questioning since you brought up work and care. And I think that this is one of the many sort of important parts, or many important things that this book, but also the sort of like, sort of movement or sort of beginning of a philosophical re-embracing of family abolition can kind of
That's a great point, Vince.
What you trace the sort of family abolition through lots of liberatory movements, not movies, sorry. Black Power, gay liberation, through the feminist movements and sort of various iterations. But one of the things I think is interesting is that you sort of point to basically 1985 to 2015 as this kind of desert of family abolitionism. Like it kind of slips off of a lot of radical to-do lists, if those to-do lists still exist, or sort of these, I don't think in 2015 we really heard that many sort of feminists talk about family abolition. I think it's sort of becoming more, again, more popularized. But what's sort of your, again, this is inviting you to sort of sum up parts of your books, which I don't want you to have to do too much, but what is your sort of read of like why and how family abolition, or even marriage abolition or children's liberation, which is another question I have, how some of these sort of family oriented demands did stop feeling pressing or necessary? And is it just because some of those movements waned or changed? It seems like it did happen kind of within a small amount of time.
Yes, great question. I mean, it's a question I ongoingly feel curious about, and I don't believe I have the sort of complete answer. But another brief comment just before I answer is though that I have been challenged a little bit on my sort of statement that it's a complete sort of lull in family abolitionist imagination in between, the mid 80s and more or less 2015. I think it is a bit of an overstatement on my part that that light completely went out. And some radicals, who were really active around the sort of so-called alter globalization, movements of the late 90s and early 2000s were sort of asking me why I didn't include some of the radical sort of infrastructures of mutual aid and cohabitation and squatting and so on in my history, which is actually a really good point. I don't think the history of family abolition is ever really entirely kind of, a flat line, in it. I might need to change my potted history just to say this is a tiny pamphlet and a very much more in-depth book by my comrade and friend M.E. O'Brien is actually forthcoming next year.
Oh God, M.E. O'Brien is also crazy.
So we can.
M.E. O'Brien is another one that has made an appearance on Socialism Saturday. M.E. O'Brien is also out of their ever-loving effing mind. That's another one we keep an eye on regularly. Sin Shadowland says, if they abolish the family, then many babies will no longer thrive and survive. Mommy government doesn't provide love and touch. Well, they don't care about that, though, Sin. They don't care about that. Like, it's pretty obvious to me that Sophie Lewis had probably an atrocious experience with her family growing up. And I'm not judging. I didn't have the happiest of childhoods, so I get it. I don't understand the appeal of the biological family. That's why I don't really talk to mine all that much, except if I have to. But it's like you don't project your baggage onto everyone else. Some people have great families, and regardless, even if I had the most sucky ass childhood in the history of childhood, it would probably still be in some ways preferable to mommy government and the childhood I would experience with that. They don't know. They do not want people to have children. This is what I'm telling you. Sophie Lewis wrote a book called Full Surrogacy Now. So I guess in some abstract way, she wants people to have children. She just doesn't want to have them raise their children. She wants all births to be via surrogacy, like in Brave New World or in The Giver. They're proposing that in real life. So no, she does not want people to have their own biological children and to raise their own biological children because she believes that mommy government can do a much better job of raising the little people because they don't even really consider them kids. They're kind of like Scientologists in this regard, in that they consider them to be little people that just haven't grown into adults yet. They think that mommy government can do a better job of like raising the little people than the actual parents can.
We're all a little, we're collaborating here in the 21st century to flesh out this history in greater depth. But yeah, basically what happened at the end of the red decade I mentioned, and I've been revisiting this history by looking at the historian Alice F.
Sorry, this is actually a great point too that Trippy Liquids is making, and so I want to just take a moment to acknowledge it. What happens when mommy government is in charge of raising all of the children and biological family doesn't really mean it doesn't even exist anymore? What happens then? Yeah, they train people to be adherent to mommy government. Kind of sounds like China, doesn't it? It's almost as if we're undergoing a cultural revolution right now that is very similar to the cultural revolution that took place in China under Mao. And this is why you guys need to pull your kids out of public school. They're already using the schools for this. In the Communist Manifesto, the section about abolishing the family is literally right before the section about them wanting to take over the system of public education. They know what they're doing.
Is sort of account of 1967 to 1975.
Yeah, or North Korea.
And what happened
Great point,
to the women's liberation ecology, which is a parallel history to histories you can read of what happened to gay liberation and what happened to Black power. And, more or less, the story is, the liberatory and critically utopianist.
Kurt, this is such a good point, Kurt. I had never thought about this. They did change civics into social studies, didn't they? I had never made that connection, Kurt. This is why I love that you come to Socialism Saturday. Thank you for that insight. Any chance you could get Lily Tang Williams back on for one of these reviews? That's a really good idea. I bet Lily Tang Williams would actually do that. That's a really good idea. I'm going to reach out to her and ask her. We'll find a good one for Lily. I'm not going to waste a Socialism Saturday on Lily Tang Williams. I got to find a good one for that.
Movements were stomped into the dust. It's simple as that. On one level, I cannot insist enough that, you know, those of us who feel that we are, in a sense, the transgenerational, you know, comrades or allies of those new left revolutionaries, have to metabolize still today, no matter what age we are, the grief of that, right? The sheer kind of multiplicity of psychological sort of cope that we tend to fall into when we're not capable collectively of simply facing the fact that we lost. It's very sort of common to look inward, what was done wrong, what were the mistakes. It's not that that's entirely not useful, it is probably useful to think about what alliances were missing, what connections were missed, but I do think there's a tendency to turn away from some of the aspirations of that moment where everything seemed possible, on the basis that it was wrong to have tried, because it didn't work out. Ellen Willis, as I talk about in Abolish the Family, describes the turning away from horizons like family abolition and children's liberation at the very end of the 70s, sort of writing in the Village Voice. Ellen Willis is describing, how people that 5 years prior were all down, for really transforming society completely, and necessarily that would include, the social factory of the home, not just the kind of public sphere and the formal workplace of the factory. But however, during the course of the 70s, like the sense that was even sayable, thinkable, just kind of like disappeared. And I've noticed myself in the archive that, in the early 70s, you have these texts from Black radicals in Oakland saying, so Pat Parker, for instance, was a sort of anti-imperialist feminist nurse who says at a meeting, a convergence, that basically white women need to get with it and be brave in saying abolish the family. And so it's kind of like my impression that, which I think is shared by many, that the only feminists talking about, family abolition are, well, actually just one, the sort of famous, infamous New York Jewish revolutionary Shulamith Firestone. At least that, when I say I thought, that was my impression, I would say 10 years ago. I think it's a common one, that there's this kind of black sheep almost of the movement who said these sort of unreasonable things about the family. In fact, when you really go and look through the written record of the movements, Firestone actually seems quite, timid almost in comparison with the united front of certain kinds of, anti-imperialist revolutionary black groups who are saying that the family obviously has to be overthrown if capitalism and the state are going to be defeated. But then at the end of the 70s and
Isn't it funny that she says they want to defeat capitalism and the state? Why do you think that she's saying they want to defeat the state? Because, I mean, socialism is all about the state controls the means of production, right? They want to abolish private property. All property will be owned by the state and distributed. They don't want anyone to have private businesses. They don't want anyone to have families. So why do you think she just said that they want to defeat the state? Defeat capitalism and the state. Exactly. Because they want to be the state. They want to bring in their own state. That's exactly right. She doesn't like the current state because the state is not doing what she wants. They perceive that the current state, the current government, is in support of capitalism, right? So what have I always told you guys? The 4 goals of the woke left are gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in your Marxist utopia. They perceive that the current state supports capitalism. They can't usher in their Marxist utopia until they defeat the current state. The ultimate goal of communism is the elimination of the state, but the installation of the state that they control.
By the mid-80s, in 1984, we have this other very famous text, which is also extremely strong and powerful and reasoned for its moment. And that is Hazel Carby's letter, sort of White Woman Listen, in which she's saying that white women are overemphasizing the oppressive character of the family. And that while Black women would not deny that the family has a sort of structurally oppressive function in society, what needs to happen right now, i.e., in the context of triumphing neoliberalism, you know, and accelerating sort of austerity and terrorization of Black life and Black households is frankly to, you know, to acknowledge the role that family has played in the history of Black resistance against the state, right? And those two moments are so fascinating because, as I say, it's not about saying, you know, one of them is kind of more right than the other. It's about recognizing that something materially, you know, gargantuan happened. The terrain.
Hang on.
Political possibility.
We got a question in the chat, and I think it's a fair question for people who are new to Socialism Saturday. Hangtown Ranger says, so today's feminism, don't confuse this with feminism. This is Marxism. Not the same thing as feminism. We need to be nuanced in our language because they are not. So today's feminism, today's Marxism is just doublespeak because the only feminine behavior would be birthing kids, nursing kids. Everything else is doable by either sex, or am I missing something? What on earth makes you think they want the mothers to nurse the kids? They want all kids born via surrogacy. In their ideal world, they would use these birthing pods that the pro-lifers are really, really excited about. Pro-lifers like to deny this, but I've seen it. Have you guys seen these artificial birthing pods that they've been creating to marinate the child in absence of a mother? This is a real thing. Pro-lifers are psyched about it. Because pro-lifers think that these birthing pods are going to eliminate all abortion. What they don't realize is they're ushering in their own demise. Because if these people have their way, every single child's going to be born via one of those artificial birthing pods because they want all children to be surrogates. They don't want people giving birth to people who are to little people who are their children. They certainly will not allow them to nurse them. That would not be allowed at all. Because if you're nursing a child, you're going to create a special bond with that child. You're not going to want to give that child over to the state. So you are correct in what you're saying in that they do want to eliminate gender. We talked about this in an early Socialism Saturday, where we talked about how, like, when with the queer Marxism stuff, trans no longer means transition, it means transform. They want all people to be non-binary. They do not want men and women to exist. And so you're correct about that. But no, they don't want people nursing their own kids. Absolutely not. Yes, and Sin is correct. You would have to get a license. You would have to be granted a child by the state. We all know how this is going to go. Almost every dystopian movie touches on this. 1984 had Artsem, Brave New World, The Giver. I don't think there was Logan's Run. They didn't have biological families. Demolition Man. In Demolition Man, you had to get a license from the state in order to have kids. It's the same thing, except this is real life, not fantasy. Dragonwater said they want the end of sex. No. Well, no, they don't want the end of sex. These people love sex. They want the end of gender. Those are two different things. They do not want the end of sex. These people want to have sex with as many people of as many genders as possible. They want the end of gender, not the end of sex. Although they did want that in 1984, but that's a different thing.
Ability completely changed, you know. So yeah, and the same can be said. I would briefly just say, you know, Anita Bryant spelled the defeat of the gay liberation horizon, you know. So I mean, not her personally in and of herself, but the sort of the isolation of gay liberationists in the context of the wider revolutionary left, which is also, I think, maybe a valid criticism, and you know, but given that that this is one of the times where it is important to recognize there was a failure of solidarity from the wider left when you know, the organized forces that wanted to re-privatize care, if you like, even more deeply in the context of a neoliberal revolution, that they started saying, and indeed we should think about this today, given what is happening with trans children and their bodily autonomy today. You know, they started saying, you know, gay people are groomers and pedophiles, and they
she's listened to James Lindsay, has she?
And they destroy the basis of you know, American capitalist life. That third thing is perhaps something that could have been leaned into. You know, the fear that comes with the suggestion of sort of sexual threat to children, the weaponization of the sexual innocence of the child, is something that back then in the early 80s and still today, we do not have a brave, united kind of left response to, right? So when someone gets called a groomer in this weaponized, organized way, the template for which was laid by Anita Bryant in the 80s and the sort of Reaganite campaign of organized homophobia and sort of, you know, Christian evangelical capitalism on steroids, you know. Yeah.
I'm sure James Lindsay would be thrilled to know that with the amount of arguing that he's been doing with Christians this week, that Sophie Lewis considers him to be a Christian evangelical.
You know, we lose an enormous amount of movement memory about where the location of sexual violence actually is in the world, right? And in the fabric of capitalist social reproduction. Where the threat to children actually is the private patriarchal nuclear household, right? And when we sort of capitulate to the sorts of moves that make a kind of...
Where the threat to children actually is in the private nuclear household. She just said that. Hang on, let's see if we can find the... Where the threat to children actually is the private patriarchal nuclear household. So she doesn't think that there's anything wrong with the public schools. Nothing's happening there that is of concern. She doesn't think she thinks that the biggest threat that children face are their own parents. Now let's really think about this for a second. So she's saying the quiet part out loud because she's one of the people that says the quiet part out loud. This is why we watch so much Sophie Lewis. Sophie Lewis says the quiet part out loud all the effing time. She gives away the ball game, and we appreciate her service in doing so. But is Sophie Lewis the only person in the world saying that the primary threat to children is the private, patriarchal, nuclear household? Is she the only one saying that the primary threat that exists to children is their parents? No. Who else is saying that? The public schools. The public schools say that every single time they implement a policy where they flat out put in writing in their school handbook that they do not have to inform the parents when kids are showing up at schools using different names and different pronouns and socially transitioning their gender in the school, because the school is saying the exact same thing as Sophie Lewis just did, because the schools will say, we can't tell the parents what's going on because it might create an unsafe environment for the children. And this is why we watch Socialism Saturday, folks. Because I want you to understand that you might think these people are wacky, you might think these people are kooky, you might think these people are insane, and you would be right on every single one of those fronts. But what I really want you to understand is that they are winning, and their policies are currently being implemented in ways that are impacting your children right now. This is not theoretical. What she just said, that parents present the greatest threat to their children that exists in society, that is currently being acted out by the public schools right now in their policy documents. Make sure, if you have kids in public school, make sure you have read that handbook cover to cover and you focus in on the gender stuff, because they all have gender sections in their handbook now. Don't go read the one from 3 years ago. You find the most current updated version on your school district's website right now, or you call the office and you get the most up-to-date version, and you make sure that you read what their policies on these things are. And I promise you that you will see her ideas reflected in that document.
And when we sort of capitulate to the sorts of moves that make a kind of threat and a social terror out of the figure of the queer person, we throw out this enormous and indispensable component of utopian wisdom, and we kind of refragment ourselves, which is why. As I guess I was trying to say earlier, the history is quite fragmented, right? When I do my potted history, one of the tragic things about it is that the different sort of instances of family abolitionist imaginary do not have as many kind of links between them as I would like to be able to say they do.
Okay, great. We're getting into some great questions that we will get to at the end, which also some of them are entangled with some of the questions I have. So I'm going to skip to one that's maybe not, has not come up among questions from the audience. Just as a reminder, you can put in your questions whenever, and we will, in about 15 minutes, we'll start answering them, if not a little bit earlier. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how your work, not just in this book, but I think more broadly has taken up with the idea of mothering against motherhood, which I believe is originally from Adrienne Rich.
Mothering against motherhood.
The idea is that the practice of care could be degendered and an action, not a fixed identity. This is how I understand it, at least. And as the action, it could be potentially shared by all. Is there any similar recuperation of fathering in the idea of family abolition, and why or why not?
So in a word, no. And
hang on, I wanna just acknowledge a couple things in the chat. Songs that anarchy, Carlin should do an anarchist day where she watches some Larkin Rose videos. I'm gonna write that down. I don't know who that is, but Larkin Rose, I do have it written down. I will look into it. Let's see. Coaster Trek says, Carlin, have you ever read Woman on the Edge of Time, Madge Piercy, 1976, a future where everyone's pronouns are per and person? Really? Hang on, Coaster Trek. I'm writing that down. Woman on the Edge of Time, Madge Piercy. I will look that up, Coaster Trek, and I do appreciate the super chat. All right, guys, please mount that like button if you're enjoying Socialism Saturday. We do Socialism Saturday every Saturday at 6 p.m. These are real socialists. This is the real deal. This is not CNN socialist. This is not AOC socialist. These are the real deal. And I'm going to show you what they're saying, and I want you to believe them when they tell you what they're going to do.
You know, this is basically one of the sort of revolutionary feminist commitments in my project, really, which is not at all to imply some sort of, association between mothering and female gender. In fact, I think the strategic, necessity, the way we get through is by insisting in a sort of spirit of feminism against cisness, to sort of borrow from Emma Heaney's collection, which is forthcoming, and I'm very excited about. The category that we must center as feminists is this kind of anti-productive labor, and I mean anti, not just sort of non-productive. I actually mean sort of the valences of social reproduction that produce, comrades, not workers. That's kind of what I mean by anti-productive, like the care of one another, Sorry, that's maybe a little bit kind of overly abstract as a response. Let me just kind of reel it back. So when you ask me about whether I have a category of fathering to mirror the revolutionary horizon of mothering against motherhood, the answer is no, because not because of a sort of hetero-pessimist kind of dislike for men. That's not sort of on the contrary, because already all of the men who are involved in care are basically mothering, and the best dads in that sense are kind of already motherers. Motherer is the sort of word I have for the ungendered kind of affinity rather than identity, for a labor that sort of holds and nurtures and creates, So when you think about fathering in everyday language, it's an act of authorship, it's an act of intellectual property patenting, if you like. It's like, I mean, this sounds maybe, overly critical, but it actually is how we think about progeny. It's how we think about heredity. It's how we think about, biogenetic kinship.
I really think, just as an aside, I think we should bring back the term progeny. Progeny is a great word. It is underused. Let's think of some ways that we can bring back the term progeny. I feel like that'll solidify if we just bring back the word progeny, that'll be one of the tools we'll use to beat these people back.
The gestational component is a labor. Well, if we think of it as a labor, I argue in my previous book that gestating is a labor. It's certainly recognized that post-gestational, maternal care is a labor in our society. But the sort of fathering aspect is the instant where the sperm hits the egg and the identity is inscribed. That's what it means to father a child. It means to ejaculate and inscribe, genetic futurity. So it's not, it's a moment of fantasized, as I said, sort of authorship, licensing. And since my family abolitionism is very much about the buried history of children's liberation, which you already raised, the idea that children, whilst they have very special sort of entitlements and needs, are people, and as—
What did I tell you? She doesn't view children as children. She views children as little people with special needs. So when she says children's liberation, what does she mean by that, do you think? This is a pop quiz for the chat. What does she mean when she says children's liberation if she just views children as little people with special needs, as little adults that have special needs because they haven't grown into full adults yet? What do you guys think? Freedom from childhood. To liberate them from childhood. Can you think of a faster way to take innocence away than to liberate someone from childhood or to free them from childhood? Do you think it's a coincidence that she already spent time poo-pooing the idea of groomers? Because she doesn't think grooming is a real thing, because they're not children, they're little adults that just need to be liberated from childhood. Liberated from their parents. Liberated from, well, many things, probably up to and including their virginity. Because they don't need innocence. It's not grooming if we're just talking about little adults. Do you guys see the logic?
Such don't, belong to anyone as possessions, and are certainly not, and this is also just scientific fact, the extensions of anybody or the sort of reproductions of anybody. In fact, Marxist biologists are quite clear, Marxist feminist biologists are quite clear that, and I know you do eugenic science research yourself, Miranda, but the reproduction of the self is not something that actually happens in sexuate reproduction. It's a fantasy we have.
Oh my God, I never heard of this argument before. Check this out. What she just said is that when you have biological reproduction, you don't reproduce the self. She basically just said that Marxist, feminist, biologists all agree that reproduction is not about reproducing yourself. That there is no biological basis for reproduction. Let's listen to that bit again, because that was effing crazy.
The idea that children, whilst they have very special sort of entitlements and needs, are people, and as such don't, belong to anyone as possessions, and are certainly not, and this is also just scientific fact, the extensions of anybody or the sort of reproductions of anybody. In fact, Marxist biologists are quite clear, Marxist feminist biologists are quite clear that, and I know you do eugenic science research yourself, Miranda, but the reproduction of the self is not something that actually happens in sexuate reproduction. It's a fantasy we have that is very central to the functions of the family that have to do with the transmission of class, of racial stability and racial identity, the administrative coherence of populations for the state. and so on and so forth, you know. So I'll just stop there, shall I?
Yes, Sophie, why don't we stop there? Yes.
Disliking, you know, a particular gender of person. It's about recognizing that patriarchy is one of capitalism's primary functions.
Patriarchy is one of capitalism's primary functions, and that's why we need to have all births via surrogacy and liberate the children from their families, and just to let them be free as the little adults that they are. Yes, Sophie, you've said enough. But sadly, we still have an hour left to go, so hunker down, folks. We're just getting started.
In the way that it kind of creates identities as part of the privatization of care.
Okay, great. I'm going to pick up on one thing you said. I'm going to just say I do anti-eugenics just to make sure that no one thinks I do eugenic science. Not the, just a side note, but I work on anti-eugenic theory on eugenics. I always feel the need to slide that in.
That's probably a good correction.
When talking.
That was probably fair.
I wanted to pick up your mention of children's liberation, because this is also one that, you know, maybe Shulamith Firestone was most famous for, you know, putting in this sort of like feminist ideological discourse, but again, used to be sort of a bigger political demand that I think radicals were making in maybe the 60s and the 70s. And so it comes up frequently in your book, but it's not always named. It's definitely there in spirit. Is children's liberation something that's sufficient for getting at the kind of freedom that you think of, that you're aiming towards with something like family abolition, or is there something that it lacks, that you, or just a different emphasis? How do you sort of see those two conceptual frameworks related?
Children's liberation is an under-theorized tradition, although there is a lot on it. It perhaps is quite fitting that it's somewhat under-theorized because, you know, children do not tend to theorize as much as adults, you know. That perhaps that's not true. Perhaps it's about the mode in which their theorizing occurs. But no, I wouldn't say they're synonyms at all. I would say that you know, the very vexed but crucial question of how children's autonomy can be nourished and supported and safeguarded at the same time as their care is ensured, you know, is one
children's
of the
autonomy can be safeguarded.
Think about deprivatizing care, i.e., you know, abolishing the family. But I don't think they're synonyms. I think the contempt with which some, you know, on the left treat the phrase, you know, adult supremacy, right, which comes from
adult supremacy
tradition, where indeed much of the, you know, excellent sort of mutual aid infrastructure and knowledge came from during the pandemic that kept people alive, and where many of the sort of youth liberation or youth autonomy frameworks are being sort of maintained and developed and experimented with, you know, led by young people, you know, today in social centers such as the now defunct Purple Thistle in Vancouver, Canada, you know, the contempt with which those notions are treated sometimes as though it couldn't possibly be serious, you know, to challenge the sorts of propertarian hierarchy.
Propertarian. I've never heard that before. She combined libertarian and property owner, which I don't know why there would be a need to combine those things. Kurt, we're propertarians. We have a new word. No, I've never heard of propertarian. Oh God, it's an old word. Oh no. Oh no. I've never heard of that one, Kurt. This is why we love having Kurt around, because Kurt knows everything.
Adults and children, depresses me somewhat. I think it's another like.
So propertarian is people who think personal property is supreme. Oh God, there's a Wikipedia page. See, you learn something new every day. I was wondering, Kurt, I was like, what's the difference between personal property and private property? But I just wanted to, but how is that different than like libertarian though? Don't we think that private property is basically like the basis of like everything? Fine, I'll claim it propertarian, fine, whatever.
Yet another legacy of the crushing of, the utopian imagination in the rise of Reaganism and Thatcherism. Yes, indeed, it used to be quite common, even in Marx's day, right, to talk about children as the poorest proletarians in the world, right? This remains very much the case, and we haven't talked enough yet about the deeply sort of interlinked sort of character of children's liberation. And,
I got that right at least.
The abolition of whiteness, prison abolition, abolition of the police, and so on.
The abolition of whiteness. What does she mean when she says the abolition of whiteness? Let's rewind. I want to hear that again.
Yeah, about the deeply sort of interlinked sort of character of children's liberation, and the abolition of whiteness, prison abolition of the police, and so on. But I will say, the racism of the family norm in the United States is something that is forcefully institutionalized through child protective services, right? CPS, right? Which is, as Dorothy Roberts, who is one of our, leading lights at University of Pennsylvania, she identifies as a sort of family policing system, right? And as she has recently made really clear,
basically this, yes,
in an interview in
basically
Praxis magazine, a new magazine from the horizons of sort of nurturing children's freedom.
Hang on, I just want to do a quick pause. Bernays says she not look in the mirror, she be super white. For anyone that's new here or new to me or new to Socialism Saturday, whiteness does not mean your skin color. You can be white and want to abolish whiteness, because whiteness does not mean your skin color. Whiteness means, as Kurt says, this is probably one of the best definitions I've seen so far. I usually just say whiteness means capitalism. Kurt says abolition of whiteness means abolition of capitalism, private property, Western civilization. When they say whiteness, they mean our entire system. So don't fall into this trap. And listen, I used to fall into this trap too. And I think that this is like a very for people just getting introduced to the woke ideology, and like they hear like them talking about white men and whiteness and things like that, it can be easy to think it is about the color of your skin. And for the lower level woke people, the ones that you're going to run into most often day to day, that's what they believe it means. So I understand why you think that. It is a completely natural mistake to make. But when you listen to them over and over and over and over and over again, you end up at the place where they don't mean skin color. They mean capitalism. Just like patriarchy. Oh, Kurt, this is such a great example. Just like patriarchy isn't about men. It's about the abolition of the family. Language is the greatest weapon that they have, and they use it against us all the time. And so we need to be quick and we need to be smart and we need to really listen to the context that they're using it, because the way that they're using it is different than the common understanding. And that's what makes them so successful, because they trick people who only go based on the common understanding.
And autonomy, you know, in a world where that sort of freedom and autonomy is, you know, attacked not primarily, although sometimes also, by, you know, people close to children in Black communities. You know, the sanctity of parenthood is not respected by the state, right? This is why polemically some theorists and philosophers have suggested that the Black family is an oxymoron, because its perimeter is always permeable to the police, you know. But when children need to be protected from, you know, the state, and, you know, in that sense, their relationships to their loved ones need to be affirmed, that doesn't have to contradict the eventual horizon of abolition of the family in the sense of the privatization of care. And so you can transform, you know, the family while defending families against police brutality, right? And that's the kind of thing that needs to have children as political actors at its core, you know, because it's simultaneously true that the family, regardless of, you know, the racial, you know, character of that family, is the most dangerous place for, you know, for children in terms of the likelihood of child sexual abuse. You know, the family is where the overwhelming majority of child sexual abuse happens. It's where the overwhelming majority of rape happens on this planet. It's where, for women, one is most likely to be murdered. You know, the majority of women, according to at least one recent study, who are killed by an intimate partner, right? A domestic partner or family member, you know? And that used to be a kind of basic feminist point, you know? That,
yes, that's what they believe.
And women, and ideally, depending on which movement, because unfortunately these alliances weren't made, but gay and queer people and gender non-conforming and trans people together are the constituency that need to struggle as a class, you know, united against the private nuclear household, i.e. patriarchal capitalist, you know, social reproduction. Yeah, so, you know, the role of children within feminism, you know, that's something that I think I want to see underlined in the 21st century once again, you know, the crucial sort of centrality in a sense of, you know, children's bodily autonomy, children's own ideas about who they want to live with, how they want to live, you know, why it makes sense, you know, to multiply work over and over and over inside every single apartment and home, you know, labor like laundry, labor like cooking, you know, you know, in a sense, you know, historically, it's almost been, you know, useful to have children involved in these discussions, because, like, you know, children haven't had those kinds of norms naturalized in their minds so much compared to some grown-ups, you know. And so when utopian architects and feminist urban planners talked about liberating children and women from the sort of work intensity of the private nuclear household, talked about putting kitchens in the public realm, kitchenless cities, which means you can cook privately if you want, if that gives you joy, but generally food will be, you know, prepared in the public space regardless, and you will be always able to get fed, you know, in the common space. That's what a kitchenless city is. So instead of having infinite multiplication, every single home has a laundry, you know, an oven, a fridge, etc., which is just kind of bananas on some level, right? Like ecologically as much as anything else. You would consider certain needs to be meetable and automatically, naturally to be met in the, appropriate to be met in the public and common space rather than turn.
Oh my God. I've never heard this argument before. She just argued that we need to get rid of kitchens in private homes because it's crazy that everyone just has their own refrigerator, everyone just has their own oven, everyone just has their own microwave, everyone just like gets their own food. What we really should be able to do in the land of Sophie Lewis is go to some common place where not everyone needs to have appliances. We can get rid of all this pesky food shortage, all of these resource considerations with like, what are they really using to make the refrigerators and the ovens and the stoves and things like that. Like we can just get rid of all of that by getting rid of private kitchens and having everyone go to the common area in this town or the city or whatever to get their rations. Yes, like a prison. Yes, that's literally what she's talking about. You will own nothing and you will be happy. I had never thought about this before in terms of like the impact on like basic, like the basic ways that we function. Abolish coming together as a family over a meal. Exactly. You can come together with the community over a meal. Let's listen to that again because that was crazy. Yes, like collective farms, like in the USSR. Exactly. Let's listen to that again. That was nuts. And by the way, she's doing it in the context of saying, just like we could get rid of kitchens and just have people go to the common area to get their food. We don't really need everyone to have their own kitchen. In the same way that we do that, we can totally get rid of the biological family and just have the children raised via the common public good.
Norms naturalized in their minds so much compared to some grown-ups, and so when utopian architects and feminist urban planners talked about liberating children and women from the sort of work intensity of the private nuclear household, talked about putting kitchens in the public realm, kitchenless cities, which means you can cook privately if you want, if that gives you joy, but generally food will be prepared in the public space regardless, and you will be always able to get fed in the common space. That's what a kitchenless city is. So instead of having infinite multiplication, every single home has a laundry, an oven, a fridge, etc., which is just kind of bananas on some level, right? Like ecologically as much as anything else. You would consider certain needs to be meetable and automatically, naturally to be met in the, appropriate to be met in the public and common space rather than turned inward to be met by kin, right? And it's about those needs and the direction we point them in, and you can trace the sort of the way that responsibilities and needs were kind of pointed, inward like that, right back to the enclosures in, medieval Europe, where laws were passed. Melinda Cooper kind of takes it from the enclosures to the poor laws, where the destitute and surplus populations of Europe were made into the legal responsibility of kin, not of the collective, but of kin. And that.
Are you guys hearing an echo? Hang on, I'm hearing an echo. One sec. Okay, sorry, I fixed the echo on my end. That was on my end. Okay, sorry.
In a sense, is one of the origin points of our general sense that, we are responsible and identifiable only with our own, and that we look out for our own, we draw a circle, and we compete. as a team in a sense, and in a sense kind of acquiesce to this blackmail that means.
Hang on, Mike is making a really great point in the chat. Michael Rogers, thank you for this. She's describing how things were before times were good, but masking it to sound like it would be preferable. That's exactly right. She's describing how things were before people even knew that having a kitchen in your home could like be a thing, because that just wasn't what was done. And then she's making that seem like it's the ideal way we should be living. I kind of like having my own kitchen, and I order DoorDash probably way more than I should, but I still like having my own kitchen, man.
That love for one another has to be interpreted as the act of laying down our lives in wage work for each other's survival, as though that it had to be that way, right?
Okay, great. We're going to go to our stack of questions, and I might interject throughout because some of them are very similar to some questions that I have. But our first one is from Julia, who says, would love to know how your new book connects to your last book, Full Surrogacy Now. What was your journey from the last book to this one? Does it continue/expand upon certain themes from Full Surrogacy? And are you hoping for a different audience between the two books? You're excited to read, and thanks for your important work.
Oh, thank you for that great question. Yeah, it's really interesting. I didn't expect Full Surrogacy Now to be read as widely as it was, and in a sense my whole life changed when it was read so widely, because it enabled me to make a living outside of the academy and to think about writing more seriously and centrally, and perhaps in a more accessible way. I do think that Abolish the Family is an easier read on some level. Although, I think Full Surrogacy Now also was on a line between scholarly and sort of non-scholarly in terms of its tone. Although who knows what a scholarly tone is. But I think the audiences I'm trying to reach with Abolish the Family are more diverse, because Full Surrogacy Now came out of a PhD about the political economy of the gestational, pregnancy, contract pregnancy industry, surrogacy, as we currently call it, but then trying to do a philosophical, inversion of the buried claims inside the word surrogacy in the present, what capitalist bioclinicians say surrogacy is, and trying to think whether that could still, persevere in a world in which we no longer thought that pregnancy generates essentially private property, and that children can only have one mother, and so on and so forth, so it's really about the sort of utopian idea that one day we might
hang on. So we got a couple new folks that don't know why she's allowed to charge money for her books, and it's totally fine under socialism. Does anyone want to explain? And this is like I understand why you have this perception. Does anyone want to explain why she is allowed to be capitalist when it comes to her books? Anyone want to take a guess? Because this is in the Communist Manifesto too. This is why you guys got to read the Communist Manifesto. You really, really do. It's free on the internet. Please. No, not quite. No, it's not a special exception. They've rationalized this. No, yes. She's not a capitalist. She's not supporting a capitalist system in selling her book. She is surviving. She is making it possible for her to live and for her to continue the fight for the glorious revolution. If you are not a part of the capitalist bourgeoisie class, then you are allowed to engage in capitalism, because the only reason you're doing it is to survive and to be able to convince people to turn against capitalism. That's why.
Which we already are, be the makers of one another, but also learn to act like it, which is the crucial point. Because currently, the ways that surrogates kind of manufacture everybody, all of us, and certainly the private nuclear households, the family home image, which looks like it's autonomous, but actually has all these kind of shadowy figures who get cut out of the family photo. That's a form of surrogation. It's just essentially reproductive stratification, to use Shelley Colin's term. It's capitalism, it's class, it's colonialism, but a utopian surrogacy, another surrogacy is possible, right? So that was where I was.
Are you guys noticing they're even calling it utopian? When I came up with like how I was going to categorize the 4 goals of the woke left, which are gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia, I very purposefully use the word utopia because they use it themselves. Utopian feminists, utopian Marxists, they use it themselves because they literally think that Marxism, real Marxism, has never been tried. And when they do their Marxism, they will usher in a glorious utopia in which all of our needs will be met by the state. And you will own nothing and you can be happy.
Going with that book, and it kind of took Abolition of the Family as almost as a starting point, or as a kind of, an assumption really, which it turns out not everybody has heard of or agrees with. So I was asked, in a sense, to clarify what that part of my politics is and what it has meant historically to other movements. So that's sort of one answer to that. There's also been a clarification for me of some of my thinking. One of the things I didn't address nearly enough really was the racial character of the family, the settler colonial formation of the family in the United States, for example. And so really part of my, homework, part of my, trajectory between Full Surrogacy Now and Abolish the Family was thinking really deeply about how family abolition is an anti-racist and a decolonial politics, and making
getting all the buzzwords in now, isn't she?
And becoming more sure about that component, basically, thanks to lots of conversations I had in the interim with people who were a little bit, startled about how it would work in their organizing contexts as anti-racists or, migrant justice activists. So I hope you read that part of the book and and form your own opinion, obviously. But in a sense, that was the work I had to do.
So I'm jumping around with the questions a little bit, but this one is one from Itamar, which is family abolition in the nuclear family about the nuclear family, or is it also about abolishing extended families and biological kinship as such? And I sort of wanted to follow that question because it does seem like one of the things I appreciate about many things I appreciate about Abolish the Family is that you're kind of clear at moments when you're departing from your previous work. And some of that seems to be a little bit around kinship and maybe like the kin and the difference between kin and kith, which I myself am not super well versed in. So maybe that question, but also if there's been some change in how you've been thinking about kinship along the two books, alongside the two books.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and certainly, as I maybe sort of indicated just a second ago, like one of the crucial questions really is which family, right? Which family are we abolishing? That's kind of the main, question asked and answered in my second chapter. I think it's the second chapter. I couldn't figure out whether the history or the anti-racist argument should come first. But basically, it's not just the nuclear It's not just the white, it's not just the bourgeois family in a
The
sense.
bourgeois family.
It's the capitalist family. You know, bourgeois, white, cis, heteropatriarchal,
bourgeois, white, cis, hetero, patriarchal. So she doesn't want to abolish all families. She just wants to abolish the capitalist family, the bourgeois family. This is exactly the same reason why she is allowed to sell her book. Because she's not a capitalist. She's part of the proletariat, part of the worker, the underclass. So she's allowed to engage in acts of capitalism because she herself is not a capitalist. In the same token, quote unquote families who are not capitalist, white, cis, hetero, patriarchal, bourgeois. If you're not any of those things, you're totally fine. But if you are cis, white, hetero, patriarchal, bourgeois, capitalist, bourgeois means the same as capitalist, then we need to abolish that shit because we can't bring about our little Marxist utopia unless we abolish that shit right quick. Does that make sense to everyone? If you are part of the capitalist class, you are bad and need to be abolished, and we need to liberate ourselves from you. If you are not part of the capitalist class, it's cool, man. We're not worried about you so much.
Nuclear. Those things are, to some extent, baked in. They're not always, you know, mapped out one for one in, you know, the lived life of families. But guess what? You know, the family is as many aspects of social discipline in, you know, many sort of shibboleths of capitalist reality. You know, it's a fiction, and like these families, you know, where are they, right? It doesn't matter that a vast majority of us don't live in anything like, you know, the image that I think you put on the poster for this event, you know, with a big kind of no block sign over it to show abolition, I guess. Which I do want to say, you know, is about simultaneous, you know, transformation, destruction, preservation. Let's get into the nerdiness of the concept of abolition in a minute, right? But, you know, yeah, in fact, let's do that in a minute. But
this is a good question, Terry. Are gay white men part of the bourgeoisie? Yes. I'm going to tell you why. Because gay white men have more disposable income and you guys spend it. So you are part of the capitalist class because your actions in and of itself are supporting capitalism. And besides, gay men are way down the oppression hierarchy. Gay men are basically not even oppressed anymore. So you're absolutely part of the system that she's talking about. Congratulations. Welcome to the club. We have jackets made.
No, it's unfortunately necessary to say, I kind of insist in this book, that all families, all private households, regardless of their composition, and again, many of us kind of fall short of the sort of idealized template, right? Participate in this, you know, public-private matrix, which privatizes care into private nuclear household, well, private households, whether they're nuclear or not, sorry. And so we don't escape, right, by happening to be queer or by happening to be, you know, even, you know, in non-white formations, you know, as sort of proletarians trying to, you know, form ourselves into households. We're participating in the family as a logic of work, right? So it's you know, that's the bad news and the good news. I think people want to exclude,
I laughed. I did.
know,
that was funny.
The populations who seem closest to, you know, a liberatory form of care from the politics of family abolition, right? So we have all these kinds of discourses, which I was very much participating in Full Surrogacy Now, sort of celebrating all the sort of extraordinary histories and skills that have been, generated at the margins of the family regime. And I don't sort of disavow that.
The family regime.
The forms of mothering against motherhood that have been generated by the descendants of captive populations, for example, or the refugees from the nuclear household of, in the form of queer children, those are the sort of, the closest thing I can point to in the present of sort of actually existing anti-families or whatever. But, that they're not somehow outside of the totality of the capitalist privatization of care, So I think that's what I hadn't worked out how to say yet in Full Surrogacy Now. I was sort of saying real families against the family. And I think the step that I say further in Abolish the Family is that it might be necessary to, unsettle the romanticization of kinship as a metaphor for our solidarities with one another. You asked me about kith and kin. So, historically, there used to be this other term used all the time, but it's kind of indicative that one fell away. So we're kind of, no one's heard of kith, K-I-T-H, and it was kith and kin, meaning kin formed through legal or blood relations, right? So if you're kin, there's a state sanctioned or a blood imaginary in your relationship. When you're kith, there's no such piece of paper or imagined piece of paper. You are basically bonded together through action, through place. That's all, But I think it's sort of interesting because we only use family metaphorically today in shops, in airlines, in services, and also in very important emancipatory traditions, such as Latinx and Black churches and so on. Like, everyday language is about kinship. And I think I'm sort of interested in what it would mean to cultivate a different sort of measuring stick, right, for what commitment means, because even though we don't think consciously about what we're saying when we use languages of kinship, I still think there's a sort of ghost of a thought there about how the only thing we can trust is something that is ratified, non-contingent, a connection that only God or the state through a really annoying legal process could dissolve. That's kind of what I'm saying when it's not what I think I'm saying, but it is kind of what I'm saying when I say we're family, right? Like, you couldn't walk away from me even if you wanted to, you'd have to divorce me, and that's a hassle. That's the form of security we think we need, because we don't actually trust on some level. And why should we, right? We are massively precaritized. We're in a care crisis, so don't get me wrong, I understand. But we don't trust that we get up every morning and choose,
awesome, Sin.
Love. That love is, to quote Ursula Le Guin, something that we remake every day, make new, like bread. I mean, that's not the right quote, but it's something similar. I'm almost saying that it's about putting faith in labor rather than, the state, or in a sort of, religiously inflected concept of kinship as identity, and reproduction as a vehicle for immortality. But just putting pressure in, putting faith, in our decisions every day, to make kinship, because kinship actually is made, not given, which kind of undermines the invocation of it as a sort of safety net. Anyway, so this gets a little bit too philosophical, perhaps. I'm sort of suggesting in this new book, really, that all the forms of, liberatory kin making that I do still celebrate, do not in and of themselves sort of amount to family abolitionism, which I actually locate kind of somewhere else, maybe surprisingly or paradoxically. I kind of want to say, don't try this at home, kids. Like, it's not really about going home and being like, right, how do I abolish the family here in my family, right? I actually locate the kernel of family abolition almost, in the streets. Like, it's when...
Hang on. Ben, I'm not picking on you because I think you just got here. Her ideology is literally being implemented in the public schools today. So don't dismiss these people by calling them dumb. I am begging you, and this is not just for Ben, this is for everyone. I am begging and pleading with you to not dismiss these people as dumb, to not dismiss these people as insane, to not dismiss these people as whack jobs, to not go out and say liberalism is a mental disorder. Don't do that, because she's winning. Her ideology is literally being implemented in public schools today, is being taught to your children in public schools today. So making fun of the way she's presenting it now and the fact that she's rambling, and I warned you guys at the beginning they were going to ramble because they do that. It's just not productive. And I understand why you're doing it, Ben. Again, I'm really not trying to pick on you. But like, I understand why you're doing it, but I really want everyone who is watching this now and who will watch this in the future to understand that when you dismiss these people as dumb or stupid or insane, you're letting them win. You're not only letting them win, you're handing them the win on a silver platter because you dismissed them, and they're already about 2 decades ahead of you, if not more. They're winning. They're kicking our asses. So if they're dumb, what does that say about us?
We meet one another in the realm of the social, which, according to Michelle Barrett and Mary McIntosh, the Marxist feminists in the 80s who were keeping alive family abolition, is the sort of antithesis of the family. The social and the family in their book, which they call the anti-social family, are kind of antitheses. So if you want to learn how to abolish the family, you first have to sort of like exit the family and meet in the, and form the social, revive the dream of sociality, and sort of almost learn what it would be like in the process of insurgency, to reimagine relations completely, so it's actually in the context of protest kitchens and mass occupations, mass, rioting and struggle, high intensity struggle, that I kind of locate the, step one of abolishing the family, which is maybe not a very satisfactory answer, because people always want to know, how do we do this? What do you mean concretely? Do you mean kibbutzes? Do you mean communes? Do you mean like going to Vermont and, cooperatively
I love how she picked out Vermont particularly.
Or whatever. Like, none of that seems to me, really like the structural solution that I'm envisaging. But also I'm a theorist, not a policymaker, and the history of critical utopianism. Utopianism, an honorable one that sometimes tolerates a certain amount of unknowing. It's about a method of denaturalization of the given, and of cultivating the feeling of a widespread entitlement to desire, more, to feel that one deserves more, than the family, for the sake of one's family, for example.
Do you really think that anyone in New Hampshire is afraid of anyone in Vermont? No, they can go and have their little communist utopia in Vermont. We don't really care, as long as they stay in Vermont and leave us the F alone. And by the way, we have more guns than they do. So what?
I really do reaffirm and insist that if you love the people currently in your family, you might be curious about what it might be like to love them outside of a matrix of coercion and blackmail.
So I think that tapped on a couple of different questions from the audience, which includes questions about concrete proposals. This one's from Jeff. What are some concrete proposals, institutionally speaking, that would define family abolition for Lewis? What would it mean for children in the household schooling? I think you kind of cover that with this sort of idea that in these sort of like revolutionary moments, like maybe some of what we saw happening in Philadelphia in 2020, but maybe another way to sort of get towards some of those questions is a question that I also had for you, which is like, what are some moments or experiments or occupations where you see the beginnings of family abolition, or are there things that we can't go home and just live family abolitionistly in the context of our family, but are there some kinds of
Exactly,
propositions
Kurt.
that would be helpful? And also this sort of brings up, I know that Cuba has a new family code, which I thought was interesting because it like outlaws commercial surrogacy, but it allows all these different kinds of family formation. So maybe it's also, we could also talk a little bit about that as we're thinking of sort of more not to thrust you as a theorist, since I'm also a theorist, into the world of concrete, but maybe have some of those moments and policies that do sort of maybe make it easier down the line to sort of think through what a world where everyone is family and no one is family looks like.
Well, I mean, as well, I suspect we will always have, the desire to live with certain people until cohabiting is gonna, we have a need for shelter, right, and a need for intimacy. So it's not about doing away with all kinds of like preferences for certain people and relationships, but a concrete example of the sort of practices that inspire me in a family abolitionist way, or as a family abolition related kind of phenomenon was, well, I mean, in 2006 there was an extraordinary teachers protest in Oaxaca in Mexico. Large numbers of people, many of them women. At one point, 3,000 police attacked them because they'd been occupying the central square of the city for over a month. The conflagrations sort of only escalated and gained support and strength, and women were very much kind of leading the transformation of what was originally a sort of teacher strike into what was eventually called the Oaxaca Commune, explicitly referencing the Paris Commune. There were these sorts of insurgent forms of social reproduction, according to, people who reported in English about the events. The barricades were places where the people of Oaxaca slept, cooked, and shared food, had sex, shared news, and came together at the end of the day. This is from a piece by Baruch Peller about this. What's interesting about
Hang on, I got a super chat coming in from Karina. Thank you very much. Never forget that BLM once called for the abolition of the nuclear family. It's all interconnected. BLM is way down the line from these people. What we're seeing right now is the origin. BLM is like several generations removed from these people, but this is a fantastic real world example of how these people are winning. Well, I don't know how to pronounce every name, dude. I'm sorry about that. But like, BLM is this woman's ideas raising $1 billion, basically mandated as an organization that you give to in order to keep your job. Really think about this point. Let's focus less on pronunciation than we do on the actual point being made, because that's what's important. BLM is the real-world implementation of this woman's ideas at a mass scale. Every time you call this woman insane, really think about that.
This is that the family, in a sense, was part of the downfall of this commune, because by many accounts, lots of the women had frustrated husbands who sort of pulled their wives back into the private household because they felt, emasculated, underserved, underfed. So, but these are the like the Oaxaca commune was really a moment of sort of radical possibility, I think, by all accounts, for people who realized that the atomized isolation of capitalist domesticity could in fact be challenged, could be thrown off, could be, even if only for a few months, unmade, yeah, I mean, I would also say maybe a little bit more pragmatically, and I don't know if everyone wants to hear this, but in my opinion, almost every form of political struggle or campaign or movement that aims to bring about infrastructures of provisioning and nurturance in the public realm is in a sense related to family abolition, or family abolitionist, if you like, because it's the right to the city, for example, right? Having a materialized, not just an abstract right to be in the public space, to have one's needs met there. Ultimately, a lot of different leftist or left adjacent struggles are kind of aiming at that,
Again, she said the quiet part out loud.
There is no syllable, no hint of criticism of the family as part of that, because, and that's fine. I'm not saying like right now, people should sort of change their messaging and say, because, family is an organized structure of scarcity, and because we should be, diminishing the importance and the role of family in society, we are funding the public gardens in Philadelphia. Like, you don't have to do that bit. Like, it could still be true, but I'm not necessarily sure that family abolition is, as sometimes people ask me to explain, some sort of like, politics that you organize under the banner of, if that makes sense. I think it's one of those subcomponents of the abolition of the present state of things that we don't want to ever separate from the rest of it, right?
The abolition of the present state of things. When you hear her say the abolition of the present state of things, what does that make you think? This is why, listen, I understand that each of these words has distinct and unique definitions. But for our purpose, in being interested in how these people are practically implementing their ideas in the real world, which is what I care about. I don't care about theory. I don't care about philosophy. I don't care about the academic definitions of these things at all. I care about how they show up in the real world. The abolition of the present state of things is going to mean capitalism. It's going to mean Western society. It's going to be, or Western civilization rather. It's going to mean private property. This is why we want to think of these words as the same. When you hear abolition, liberation, communism, socialism, any of those words, you have to think of them as fundamentally the same. because in terms of real world implementation, that is how we're going to experience them, as the same. Destruction of freedom in any form. I like that definition, Dragonwater. Capitalism versus communism, the current system that we are all living in right now. Abolition of capitalism in the government. Abolish capitalism. This is not wrong. She does want a totalitarian dictatorship. She just doesn't know that. Change everything. Revolution. That's another word. Revolution. Revolutionize everything. Gender revolution. Trans revolution. Anytime you hear these words, you need to be thinking about it in the image of Marx.
I hope this has been obvious or implicit so far from everything I've said, but just in case, like, don't separate this from the struggle against capitalism.
See?
Bad
Told
things
ya.
could happen if you did try. But since we were kind of circling around it, let's briefly touch on the meaning of abolition. And when, basically, I noticed
let's do it, Sophie.
in the chat that someone was sort of suggesting, it sounds like a really different kind of use of the word abolition than is operative in the horizon of prison abolition or abolition of the police. And I actually just wanted to explain, no, in my opinion, actually no, funnily enough.
See?
And that's a sort of sensibility I take from Ruthie Wilson-Gilmore, who, as you also were remarking to me, Miranda, understands the matter of abolition as a sort of as a
hang on,
thing,
stop. Hang on. Stop. And again, pretty astounding. I think you're new here. I don't recognize you. I understand why you're making this mistake. She is not a liberal. She is a socialist. Those are not the same things. Now, you guys sometimes use the term liberal and socialist interchangeably, but they are not the same things at all. And I'm really going to recommend you stop using them interchangeably and you stop saying people like her are lazy, because she's kicking your ass. And every time you guys do this, every time you try to dismiss what you're hearing right now in some way, I'm going to remind you that she is kicking your ass. She is dictating the terms by which your children are educated right now. She is the precursor to what BLM was. Don't tell me she's lazy. How is she winning so gloriously if she's lazy? Don't tell me she's lazy. She's not. They're not lazy. And they all have jobs, because they wouldn't have jobs if they wouldn't own every institution in the country if they didn't have jobs. It is important that we think about it in this way. Dismissing them just gains us nothing. We lose when we dismiss them.
Presence and building, not of kind of tearing down and deleting. And so actually, the question of abolition for her when it comes to the criminal justice system is about the making of real justice, not simply the sort of destruction of the present infrastructure that pretends to deliver justice, right? So in the capitalist present, all the institutions that constitute
this is
capitalist
correct.
Justice are a kind of, evil joke, like of justice, right? A travesty of justice, And so abolition is kind of working with the tiny little filament inside that system that has something going for it, like our desire to be safe, our desire for justice, right? Which again is not what is delivered by the current system, but it kind of is propped up partly by our collective desire for that thing, right? So abolition is not really about setting fire to all the prisons and all the police stations, although great, like it's not that, but if you did that to all of the prisons and all of the police stations today, you wouldn't have abolished the carceral, justice system. You wouldn't even
Thank
have
you
come
for the
close.
compliment. I'm about 2 years
Compliment.
ahead of all of them.
Abolition is where you've created the world that would make.
If you would like to support the work I'm doing, which is light years ahead of where Ben Shapiro and Tim Pool is, they're going to get to where I am. And by the time they catch up to me, I'm going to be 2 years ahead of them again, if not even more. I might actually be more than 2 years ahead of where Ben Shapiro is on this. I'm way far ahead of Tim Pool. Tim Pool's not even thinking about this. So if you want to support the work I'm doing, head over to activelyunwoke.com/support. Help me do this full time so I can explain this to people in the way that it should be explained, not in the way it's being explained right now, in the way that it actually should be explained. I'd really appreciate the help. If you can throw me $5 a month on Substack or Locals or Patreon, that would be just great.
That system, unthinkable, truly a strange, weird memory, like for us, it's quite hard to imagine. I mean, of course, slavery still exists in the present, right? And abolition is still an ongoing process with regard to slavery, but we can't really, it's very hard, I think, for many people today to imagine what it was like to have an overarching system of everyday normalized chattel slavery, and that's what we would be. That abolition is the day where really we almost can't imagine it at all anymore, right? And that's what like prison abolition would also be, the day where no one can imagine putting people in cages. I
heard it. Radical moderate.
The state doing that on a mass scale, right? That would be the day where we have abolished. And family is in a sense, it has a utopian kernel, right? It's this dream that people can be unconditionally loved. I mentioned earlier, M.E. O'Brien, and there's something very moving in her book, which I've been reading. It's coming out next year, where she describes.
Why, thank you, Terry. I'm very flattered by that.
And the sort of moments.
I will say that I did just see an article pop up on Twitter about Harry not having a role in the coronation while I was on. I'm paying attention to royal drama too. My husband's, this is a side note, my husband asked me today, because I was making my husband watch videos about Harry's book today. And my husband asked me, he's like, why don't you make content about the royals, Carlin? And I was like, because that's playtime. You don't make work out of play, then it stops being play. Oh, thank you, Songs That Anarchy that are catchy. I appreciate that. I'm always reading your name as Songs That Anarchy, which is actually a much cooler name. You should change it. Anyway, let's keep going, guys. Almost done. We got about 20 minutes left of this. If you're enjoying the show so far, we do Socialism Saturdays on Saturdays at 6 p.m. on my channel. Please mount that like button if you're here for it. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. I do appreciate the support. Let's wrap this up.
Of family abolitionist desire, you might be able to read in that struggle. She actually looked at George Floyd's crying out for his mother while dying, under the boot of the police officer, Derek Chauvin. And I really admire her analysis there, because it's a crucial component, I think, of the sensibility of abolition that I'm reaching for myself as well. She writes that, family abolition has to be an affirmation of that, of that call for his mother that George Floyd sort of uttered in his dying moments, not some kind of dismissal of it. M.E. O'Brien talks about Martin Luther King's vision of the beloved community, and I sort of see that as a very sort of noble, historical link to draw between our hopes as tender, fragile, needy animals, that our mothers in every sense, and as I say, I think mothering is a diffuse labor, will come to our aid, right? Our neediness.
If you guys think that I'm not getting up early to put on my royal garb to stream the coronation, I'm absolutely sure. I'm going to be like, we're going to have full on royal day on coronation day. I'm such a nerd about this stuff. I'm so excited to see the actual coronation. So don't worry. We're going to do royal things every once in a while. I'm just not going to make a job of it.
In moments of horror and brutalization, right? That's actually what family, the kernel is, that I actually kind of want to abolish, in the sense of preserve. Like, because abolition does have a negation in it, but it also has something about holding on, so that, again, with prisons, it's this idea that we can find justice, somehow. This is not how to do it. With families, the love between people is, I think, not served well by the infrastructure of privatized households in capitalism. So it's actually about that relation between people, that mother love, if you like, and other forms as well, being generalized, universalized across all of society. Who knows what that would look like, but it's about, making sure that everyone actually gets to feel what it would be like red love is what Alexandra Kollontai called this, to be held, to be known, to be cared for outside of a system of economic coercion. And I think I've said this now 3 times, but organized scarcity, which we then become very attached to because it's all we have. And in a moment where utopianism seems like something we can't afford, we find it very difficult to let go of the things to which we are attached, even when we recognize, their limitations. It's very scary, incredibly scary. My entire opening chapter is devoted to the psychological reaction we have, all of us, me included, to the idea of being manufactured in some different way outside of the isolated intensity of the sort of usually parental dyad, 2 people or 1 or maybe a couple more, but yeah, and I recognize that, and I honor it, and I don't want to shy away from it, because I think that all really serious revolutionary politics actually contains something somewhat frightening of that kind,
Okay, we're going to jump to a different question from Hero, who asks, or states, you mentioned that you think cis women, trans people, gender non-conforming people, etc., as a class can fight as a class against the patriarchal family. Could you say a little bit more about what makes this group a class, and why, if them being conceived as a class is important for family abolition?
Yeah, so I am not personally invested in the sort of sex class analysis of this so-called second wave, and I admit I sort of was speaking, I possibly misspoke when I used that terminology, although I think increasingly I've noticed theorists using the word class in a slightly looser sense as well. It's kind of having a comeback, I think, the notion of sort of in different, anyway, I sorry, that's a rabbit hole I could go into. Just to say, I don't propose that there is, a sex class, right? This is a real mistake that occurred in the women's liberation moment, where a cultural feminist turn started, de-linking from the left, de-linking from anti-capitalism, and de-linking from class, and just sort of denying that there are internal class antagonisms between women, within the sisterhood, just to be clear. But what I think is useful is understanding that feminization as a process that orders bodies in a way that kind of affects a devaluation, like as Rosemarie Hennessy calls this, a sort of like a second skin. And it's not about having a certain set of genitals or so on, and it's about the sort of in fact, a really good way to think about feminization as an economic phenomenon is to look at trans sex workers and their the sort of what is it? Extractive abandonment, I think is a phrase that some Marxists use to explain how the sort of making surplus via feminization of certain populations can be very productive for capitalism and for the state. But feminization is something that can be thought of as a sort of almost like a classing, like a classing of bodies that is fluid and it's not kind of dependable. But you can use it, I think, to think about people within nuclear households who are exposed to violence within the family. Like, I haven't talked about violence as much as I should, because it's not just privatization of labor that is at stake in the family. It's also violence, which comes internally in the family and is also buttressed by external violence, right? There's sort of state racist terror that makes it very difficult to exit the family. There are economic factors that contribute, but there's also frankly forms of violence that tear families apart under the name of the family, funnily enough, right? When you have people at the border being kind of separated from one another, children and parents, the only response we have as a left, kind of understandably, is keep families together, stop family separations, which, it gets the message across, because it's a response on the terms of the state's attempt to say, if we admitted you as a real family, you would be honored, and you would be, in America, we respect families, right? Which is, again, a massive racialized lie, right? Like, it only is operative for some people, some populations, more specifically in America, right? And so targeting kin relationships at the border is actually part of the family regime. It's one of the forms of violence that sort of makes people feel, that there is no alternative, paradoxically. Just to be completely clear, like the border guards aren't somehow abolishing the family by disrespecting family bonds. They're actually operating on the logic of the family's sort of sanctity.
Wow.
But I think gosh, what more can I say? I realized I've that was a very diffuse answer. I realized there's other things we need to get to. So I think, just to reiterate, different sort of people within a household are structurally exposed to internal violence, and you can think of that internal violence as a site where perhaps it makes sense to talk about, like.
Hang on. So Sin and Sam in the chat are talking about, could I potentially make a woke dictionary on Substat that would be fairly useful for this? So here's the thing. I do have this on my list. I actually have this already started. But the thing of it is I don't have enough time to do everything I want to do. I have so many, and if you go to activelyunwoke.com/roadmap, you can see the things that I want to do. And Woke 101, the woke dictionary, is actually on the list. But in order to accomplish these things, I need financial support to do it. Because the more financial support I get, the more I'm going to be able to free up my time to be able to work on it. So I do have this on the list. And if you want me doing that, if you want me writing more articles a week, if you want me doing this stuff, then go to the Substack, sign up as a monthly supporter for $5 a month, or go to my local, sign up as a monthly supporter for $5 a month, go to my Patreon, sign up as a monthly supporter for $5 a month. You can also give me more money if you want to. But the sooner that I'm able to make this my full-time job, because it is not my full-time job right now, the more content you guys are going to get that you've been asking for. And I have it all planned out already, but I wasn't able to do it last year. Because I spent half the year being harassed by people, and that just threw a real wrench into everything. I had a lot of lies spread about me. I was the target of a smear campaign. I've now put that issue to bed. I've also been doing consulting on the side for like a long time to be able to do things like pay my mortgage and stuff like that. So if you want me to do this, then you need to financially contribute in some way. And I do appreciate everyone who is supporting my work, regardless of, what level you're supporting at. You're making all this possible. And I do appreciate that. And if you cannot financially contribute right now, that's totally fine. I get it. It's not the best time for a lot of people, but please share my content, talk about my content, put it out there to your friends and family, because that is going to allow me to get more supporters, and I do appreciate it. ZKTK says, this is the result of the left having uncontested control of the academy and cultural. The only criticism allowed is taking a more extreme position. That is exactly correct. Exactly right. Exactly right. All right, guys, let's finish this up.
A solidarity, a natural solidarity.
Awesome,
between,
Brooklyn.
let's
I
say,
appreciate
women,
it.
Children, queer, trans, gender non-conforming people. I sometimes feel like pointing to the statistical fact that marriage is still very, very clearly beneficial to heterosexual cis men. So, men live longer when they are married. Women live less long when they are married. When a heterosexual married couple gets sick, if it's the woman who has a terminal illness, it tends to be then that the man divorces her and walks away from her care. When it is the man who gets terminally ill, the woman almost
I
never
appreciate
divorces
that,
him
Barb.
in
Thank you
moment.
so much.
Right? There are these kinds of statistical elements of the labor division that marriage ultimately is, right? Organizes, even though neoliberalism has changed a lot about social reproduction, and marriage is no longer explicitly a property institution. Like wives are no longer property per se, but the broad brushstrokes of that sort of private public labor division still obtain, and still basically boost the longevity of certain populations at the expense of others.
Okay, great. So if you have time for one more question, is there any sitting there that you want to point to? Unfortunately, we're not getting to all of the questions, but we have a couple outstanding. But
I noticed a really personal question, and I would be happy to even just sort of, affirm it and listen to it, even if I don't have very concrete answers. But I noticed the person who said that they were wondering if I have advice about how to find, on a more immediate basis, people who are interested in giving and receiving care, or even interested in family abolition. I'm a queer single parent drowning under the burden of doing it all alone. I've been working for 2 years to connect with others and try to build quote unquote community, but it seems everyone is too busy with their own families.
Excellent, Terry. I appreciate that. I hope you liked it.
I'm so tired of being lonely and overburdened. As I say, I didn't want to ignore this, and I don't have a lot of sort of really concrete advice per se, but I feel like this experience is one that I hear a lot. People in my life, people outside of my immediate life, have expressed really, really similar experiences. I think there was a moment earlier in the year where appetite still existed for experimenting with alternative forms, perhaps trying to start breaking down some of the institutions that naturalize, the ultra privatization of our lives, the ultra atomization of our lives. But I think there was also a pendulum swing back to like normalization, like an appetite for normal, which is quite depressing, I think, for some of us. Yeah, I don't know where you're speaking from, friend, but it's, I think, important to recognize that in cities where rents are really high and the cost of living is unbearable and work is crushing people at an exceptionally high rate, that there is less, time, literally, that in people's hands, right? So, that's easy to say, but if you feel like the time has come to explore, different like locations where the boot of wage labor is less sort of heavily pressing down on people's necks, then you might find that there is more.
She thinks she's going to take the boot off of people's necks
in my life. I wish I could explain, I really do, how the sort of organized loneliness that this mode of production generates could be undone. I just don't know. Many of the solutions that people want to hear when editors ask me to write about this in a sort of unscary way, I think they really want to hear about bourgeois co-parenting solutions and things.
Bourgeois co-parenting solutions. John Brown says, he who controls the medium controls the message. He who controls the message controls the masses. The poison dwarf, Nazi Joseph Goebbels. That is absolutely correct. And these people control the medium, and these people control the message. Remember that.
Yeah, but actually it's working class people who often innovate some of the most sort of creative, because of necessity, sort of ways of figuring out care, responsibilities and burdens, and distributing labor, which is what anti-work often is in the domain of care. When I say anti-work, I mean a horizon that doesn't call for, automation or sort of stopping doing things, because with care, frequently people say what we need is more care, and it's not exactly that I disagree, but I think what needs to happen when we talk about care is that we understand what we care for and why in this world, which is dominated by a sort of religion of productivity, a religion of work, and which very specifically cares in certain ways for certain ends, and so I want to have conversations that are willing to talk about the worlds and the relations, and perhaps even the people, the classes that we wish to care for less or even not at all, and ask kind of about the qualitative dimensions of the care that we want to organize, not just the sort of the amount, because socially reproducing people is something we want to make visible as work, but not because that's a good thing. Like reproducing the world is actually something that I wouldn't want to own up to participating in, because the world is extremely violent, and this is also part of politicizing motherhood in a very unromantic way, right? Like mothers have helped build empire. Mothers have helped build eugenic regimes. Mothers are very much part of holding up patriarchy, right? The institution of motherhood itself, according to Adrienne Rich and others in the 70s, is patriarchal. This is why mothering against motherhood is a sort of anti-patriarchal insurgency against a patriarchal institution. So when you won't find necessarily already married couples who are turning their backs from you, willing to kind of experiment like this. But you might find in surprising places like, I don't know, substance abuse support groups, or like community kitchens, places where people are already sharing resources. In my neighborhood there are really awesome kind of like food sharing resources and sort of community pantries and things, and I think people meet through those. And you might find that the appetite for resource sharing turns into an appetite for labor fusing. I hope you hang in there. It's kind of a depressing season and a depressing moment. I hope this hasn't been too rough on everybody. I think family abolition is simultaneously quite an exciting horizon that sometimes makes people feel really good, and I get lots of messages to that effect, even kind of showing me how it has helped people survive inside really nuclear settings. Like I get people sending me pictures of my books with babies, or in maternity wards and birthing suites and breakfast tables full of children's sort of spoons and forks. But I also find that it sometimes awakens people to realizations about trauma and deficit, and a sense of the scale of the problem. I really am grateful to all of you for your attention and your great questions, and to Miranda, who I believe has somewhat of a cold and has been battling through it for my sake, to host me here with such attention and skill. That perhaps I should let her get off screen and into bed on this wintry Tuesday night.
So with that, yes,
she has 20,000 followers on Twitter. 20,000.
But this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much to Dr. Sophie Lewis and the Andrea Mitchell Center. Where we'll cut off the, unfortunately we did not get to all the questions, but we will cut off the event for now, and pay attention to future Andrea Mitchell Center events for attention to other subjects. Okay, I'm gonna let us all go. Have a good night. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Well, that ends the stream for today. I just wanted to let you guys know, in case you are curious about Sophie and her supporters, Sophie is on Twitter. She has 19,000.1 followers on Twitter, so this is not an insignificant person. And she's on Patreon, and she's making over $1,000 a month on Patreon. 280 people supporting Sophie on Patreon, and I'm sure that's just one of many places that people are supporting her. So I bring this up, guys, because if you would like me to spend my time fighting back against the Sophie Lewises of the world, I need your help in order to be able to do that. If you head over to activelyunwoke.com/support, you can find several ways that you can help me. Of course, making a one-time gift is always valued, but I really would prefer if people could sign up for consistent monthly donations. $5 a month, yo. $5 a month, less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. You can get in on my locals community for $5 a month. $50 a year if you want to do it annually. You get 2 months for free. That is my home-based private community. You can sign up on Patreon. I'm building up my Patreon. I don't have many supporters on Patreon right now, but I'm really working on it. I would love to get more supporters than Sophie Lewis on Patreon. That'd be pretty great. You can sign up anywhere from $5 a month all the way up to $250 a month, depending on what perks you want. That's all great. And on Substack, I'm setting a goal this month that if I want to get 100 paying Substack supporters. I'm 30% of the way there already. And if I don't meet that goal then I'm going to set up a paywall on my Substack for my articles, so people will have to pay to access some of them. I don't want to do that, guys. I want my work to be free for everyone, but I need your help in order to be able to do that. You can sign up on my Actively Unwoke Substack, which is what I would recommend. I also have my Red Pill Diaries Substack that's monetized as well. And so whichever one you want to support is fine with me. And whatever is clever for you. But if like, listen, she's got more supporters right now on Patreon than I do by like a significant degree. She's got all this stuff, man. She's fucking nuts. I know I said not to dismiss her as fucking nuts, but like her ideas are nutty. If you want me to be fighting back against people like her full time, I need your help in order to be able to do it. And if you can't financially help right now, then I would just ask you to share my work. And I'm starting this new thing on Substack, and I want to thank Mary O'Brien for the $5 tip on Rockfin. Mary, thank you for that support. I'm starting this new thing on my Substack, which is a weekly newsletter. And I'm just going to put the link in the chat below. And Leonard, I appreciate your support and locals. And this is basically a roundup of some of the things I've been doing for the last week. So if you want to know where your money's going to, you can come here, see the articles that I've written this week, see some of the videos I produced. This isn't even the extent of the content I produced. This is just like the Unwoke content that I produced. You can listen to the podcast that I did. You can see what I've got on deck for next week. So I'm being fully transparent about this, guys. You're going to know what your $5 a month is going to when you contribute, because I really do appreciate it. And I want you to know that I'm going to be a good steward of your dollar. All right, guys, we got a lot coming next week. But if you would like to join me for a movie tomorrow night in my supporter Discord, again, I'm going to send out my supporter Discord link to everyone, whether they're my locals, my Patreon, my Substack. Everyone's going to get a link tomorrow to join the supporter Discord, and you can come at 8 p.m. tomorrow and watch The Jazz Singer with us. If that's not your speed, don't worry. We do movie night every week, so there'll be a different movie next week if you want something different. But come and join my supporter Discord as a thank you for supporting the work I'm doing. We do movie nights on Sundays at 8 p.m. almost every single week. It's Jennifer January, because Jennifer is our illustrious movie night host, and she wants to watch The Jazz Singer. I've never seen it. I'm told it's a great movie. I'm looking forward to watching it with some folks tomorrow. All right, guys, we will be back for Socialism Saturday next Saturday at 6 p.m. The next live stream I do will probably be on Monday at 5 p.m. Take care. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you soon.